StarSavior just added a brand new SSR Savior with the August 20th update. And this time we have Cristelle. Cristelle is a Sun attribute ranger from the Morrel Ocean Traders, and she arrives alongside the new event story, Metabasis of Ashen Embers, but Cristelle isn't really your traditional ranger who just stacks crit and tries to hit one enormous number. Her entire kit is built around debuffs, burn, chain damage, and constantly pushing herself forward on the action gauge. And after looking through her full kit and some early testing, I think she's a lot more interesting than she might look at first glance. So let's go through exactly how Cristelle works, how important her dupes are, what kind of team she wants, her signature Arcana, and most importantly, is she actually worth pulling? The easiest way to understand Cristelle is to think of her as a debuff-based damage dealer with an extremely fast combat rotation. Burn is a major part of her kit, but burn isn't actually the only thing she cares about. What she really wants is for enemies to have multiple debuffs. The more debuffs you can put on her target, the more opportunities Cristelle has to generate additional chain damage. At the same time, she has several different ways of advancing her own action gauge. So once her rotation gets started, she can potentially take turns much more frequently than you would expect, and the mechanic tying everything together is called ignition. Cristelle's unique passive is called Festering Resentment. At the beginning of the first battle, she immediately gives herself 3 stacks of ignition. Then, whenever another ally hits an enemy using a special skill or ultimate, Cristelle gains another stack of ignition. If that ally is also Sun attribute, she gains 1 additional stack. So a Sun ally can potentially give Cristelle 2 ignition from a single qualifying attack. And that's important because Cristelle wants to reach the maximum of 5 stacks as quickly as possible. She can basically begin a fight already most of the way there. Her basic attack, Vengeance and Retribution, gives her another stack of ignition as well, but there's another very important part of the passive. If Cristelle uses Vengeance and Retribution against an enemy that already has a debuff, she has a 100% chance to deal additional chain damage based on her attack. She also advances her own action gauge. You're not just using it because everything else is on cooldown. You're gaining ignition, triggering additional damage and pushing Cristelle closer to another turn. At the base level, that's 18%. And with additional investment, it can eventually reach 30%. So even Cristelle's basic attack becomes important once the enemy has been debuffed. Once Cristelle reaches maximum ignition, we get to what I think is the centerpiece of her kit, Seething Vengeance. When another ally attacks while Cristelle is sitting at maximum ignition, Seething Vengeance can activate, and this ability does a lot. First, Cristelle gives herself an undispellable buff called Drive for Revenge for 3 turns. Drive for Revenge increases her attack and effect hit by 25%. Those are basically the 2 stats her kit wants most. Attack increases her regular damage, her burn damage, and especially the chain damage that makes up such a large portion of her output, and effect hit makes her debuff-focused playstyle more reliable. After that, Seething Vengeance has up to a 100% chance to place 2 stacks of burn on every enemy for 2 turns. So now Cristelle has immediately set up the debuffs she needs for the rest of her kit. But we're still not finished. She can advance her action gauge by as much as 50%, and she grants 2 ignition to every other Sun attribute ally on the team. Then Cristelle removes all of her own ignition stacks and starts building them again. That's the rotation, build ignition, trigger Seething Vengeance, buff Cristelle, burn the enemy team, advance her action gauge, reset ignition. Then start the entire process again. And because Sun characters build her ignition faster, she obviously has natural synergy with Sun teams, but I don't think you necessarily need to lock Cristelle into a completely Sun-only composition. This is probably the most important thing about team building with Cristelle. Her ultimate doesn't say that it deals additional chain damage for every stack of burn. It cares about debuffs. That's much broader. Cristelle's ultimate attacks a single enemy and has a 100% chance to extend the duration of burn on that target by 1 turn. Then, for each debuff currently on that enemy, she deals additional chain damage proportional to her attack, up to 5 instances. And after attacking, she advances her action gauge another 30%. That means teammates who apply other useful debuffs can still contribute to Cristelle's damage. Defense reductions, attack reductions, status effects, and other debuffs can help her reach that 5-instance cap. So while burn teams are an obvious option, a debuff-heavy team could potentially be just as interesting. The important thing is making sure the target has plenty of negative effects sitting on it before Cristelle launches her ultimate. This is the part of her kit that stands out to me the most. Her passive can advance her action gauge through her basic attack. Seething Vengeance can advance it by up to 50%. And her ultimate advances it another 30%. Those effects aren't necessarily all happening at exactly the same moment, but over the course of her rotation she is getting pushed forward constantly. That makes her 3 and 4 turn cooldowns much less restrictive than they initially sound. Cristelle is simply taking more actions, and that could be especially important in PvP. A fast teammate can help build her ignition early. Cristelle can trigger Seething Vengeance, suddenly advance her action gauge, spread burn across the enemy team, and potentially cycle back around much faster than expected. That's a lot of pressure. Her Nova Burst also improves her basic attack. When active, her basic temporarily deals 1 additional toughness, fixed damage, and gains a 100% chance to inflict 1 stack of burn for 2 turns. More importantly, that burn ignores effect resistance. So even while she's cycling through basic attacks and waiting on the rest of her kit, she continues contributing to her own debuff engine. Based on how her damage is actually working, I would prioritize attack and effect hit. Cristelle certainly can crit with her normal attacks and direct skill damage, but a large amount of her real value appears to come from burn and chain damage, and those mechanics make raw attack extremely valuable. So rather than treating her like a completely standard crit ranger, I would focus on attack first. Make sure you have enough effect hit for reliable debuff application, and then work additional offensive stats into the build afterward. An attack-focused gear setup combined with effect hit looks like one of the safer early options. Crit chance and crit damage aren't useless, but I wouldn't sacrifice attack or the reliability of her debuffs just to chase a traditional crit build. Cristelle is doing damage differently, build around what her kit actually scales from. For skill investment, the most important upgrades appear to be her passive and Seething Vengeance. Her passive directly supports the chain damage and action gauge mechanics that define the character. Seething Vengeance benefits heavily from investment as well, including stronger action gauge advancement and important improvements to the skill's uptime. There are also meaningful cooldown improvements in her skill progression, so reaching those breakpoint levels is more important than simply spreading materials evenly across everything. Her ultimate is worth investing in for damage and cooldown improvements, while the basic attack can generally come afterward, so I would prioritize the mechanics that improve her rotation before dumping everything into her basic attack. This is actually some good news. Cristelle looks perfectly functional at 1 copy. The important 100% chain damage activation is already part of the base character. Her additional copies improve her numbers rather than unlocking the basic functionality of the kit. Her attack bonus can increase from 5 to 10 and eventually 15%, while her action gauge gain can improve from 18 to 24 and finally 30%. Those are absolutely good upgrades. A fully invested Cristelle is going to cycle faster and hit harder. But I don't see her as a character where you're pulling the first copy and discovering that half the kit doesn't work until you get duplicates. For most players, 1 copy should be enough. Then we have Cristelle's signature SSR Arcana, Bound for Eternity. And strangely enough, I'm considerably less excited about the Arcana than I am about Cristelle herself. It's a universal attack support Arcana focused around the focus training stat. Its potential can provide an 8% attack increase, which is certainly useful for Cristelle. But the problem is that focus currently isn't one of the most desirable training paths for a lot of damage-focused journey builds. The Arcana also doesn't appear to bring some enormous exclusive effect that suddenly transforms Cristelle. There are other ways to get valuable attack-related potentials into her build. So if you're deciding between spending resources on Cristelle herself or chasing Bound for Eternity, I think the character is considerably more important. I would consider the Arcana optional rather than mandatory. So where does Cristelle actually fit? In PvE, she has strong single-target potential once you can reliably load an enemy with debuffs. Her burn can provide sustained damage, her ultimate converts debuff count into additional chain damage, and the repeated action gauge boosts let her cycle faster than her cooldowns initially suggest. Early testing also suggests that her actual damage is better than you might expect just from reading the descriptions. The biggest question is simply competition. Sun already has some very strong damage options, so if your account already has a heavily invested Sun roster, Cristelle may improve your options without necessarily replacing everything you're already using. PvP might actually be where she becomes more interesting. Fast action gauge manipulation is extremely valuable there. She can spread burn across the entire enemy team. Her special skill doesn't rely on dealing conventional direct damage, and chain damage gives her another way to pressure targets. Early August tier placements have generally put Cristelle somewhere around a tier for both PvE and PvP. Considering she literally released on August 20th though, I would treat any tier placement right now as provisional. We need more time with optimized builds before calling her either broken or mediocre. So here's where I land. Cristelle looks good, she has a well-designed kit, she has strong internal synergy, she works at one copy, and she offers something a little different from the usual straightforward damage dealer. If you like burn teams, debuff teams, fast turn cycling, or chain damage, Cristelle is absolutely worth considering. She's also a much easier recommendation if your Sun roster needs another strong damage dealer. On the other hand, if you already have multiple highly invested Sun DPS characters and your resources are limited, I don't think Cristelle looks mandatory. She's strong, but strong and must pull aren't necessarily the same thing. And when it comes to her Arcana, I'd be even more conservative. Cristelle herself is the prize here. Bound for Eternity looks useful, but definitely not essential. For most players, I would take one copy of Cristelle and stop there rather than chasing duplicates or heavily investing into the Arcana banner. But that's Cristelle. A very fast Sun Ranger built around burn debuffs and repeated chain damage, with one of the more interesting action gauge engines we've gotten recently. Let me know if you're pulling for Cristelle or if you're saving your Stella Gems for what's coming next. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.